In the truest sense, Papua New Guinea is the last frontier on Earth. Part of the world's second largest island, Papua New Guinea is one of the world's least explored countries, with over 750 tribes flourishing with little or no outside influence for many a year. The island's country's coral reefs support over 1,200 different fish species as an integral part of the coral triangle, generally considered by marine biologists as the global epicenter of marine species diversity.
Hey there everyone, I'm Don, Professor Goway, and welcome to the Goway Pro Travel Tale Podcast. Travel far and travel often.
Yeah, my God. Okay, here we go again. That's such a newbie blunder. Here we go. Just before we came on air, I did the introduction I'm about to do, and I forgot to push the record button, so I feel like a bit of a,
Yes.
bit of a newbie, as I just said. So today, we are welcome to our podcast, Goway Pro Travel Tales Podcast, which is normally me speaking to one of our trade partners, be a ground operator around the world, or one of our tourist board partners, or even airline partners. But today we're doing something a little bit different. We're speaking to, I guess, maybe a crass term, our end users, so to speak, one of a couple of our clients who traveled with Goway to many of our locations around the world, and we'll touch on where else they've been. But in this instance, they've just recently come back in October of last year from Papua New Guinea, which is truly a different destination, to say the least. And before I keep saying they, I am referring to our guests here today, John and Peggy. Welcome, John and Peggy, for joining us today. So my first question would be, of all the destinations in the world, and as I mentioned in the intro, this is considered one of the last frontiers of travel. What attracted you to choosing Papua New Guinea as a destination?
Thanks, Don. Well, I'm going to quickly try and give you an overview of that one, answer to that
Sure.
question. We had a chance we wanted to travel to the South Pacific, and we had identified Papua New Guinea as one of our possible locations because I guess maybe when I was going to elementary school, way back when, I used to bring home National Geographic and Reader's Digest books about the mudmen in Papua New Guinea, about the tribes in Papua New Guinea. And I remember actually reading about a new tribe was found in Papua New Guinea, and Goway in its materials talked about the Melpa tribe just being found in the 1930s, and we would have a chance to as one of our side trips to visit them. And I said, perfect. So let's talk about Papua New Guinea. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to that, to that answer to that question, I should say, but I think that's probably enough now.
Yeah, I'm sure. So you mentioned you had looked at, or were looking at, the South Pacific at that time. Had you been to the South Pacific before? Had you visited Australia or New Zealand or any of the Pacific Islands?
Yeah, that's all right.
No, we live in Alberta, just to give some people a background. Before I retired in 2017, we spent our summers, holidays visiting the East Coast of Canada because that's where our family lives. But when we retired, the first thing we did was take a couple of trips off to Europe. Not with a company per se. We just booked ourselves in and out and traveled Europe on our own. We started by going over for 2 months because having retired, we could spend a little more time. Then we went off to Ecuador and the Galapagos. We did that with a couple tours. Then we went to Bolivia. We did that with guides and drivers, not Goway, but with the tour, so to speak, privatized for us. Yep. We took off to Tuktoyaktuk in Canada when toward the end of COVID. South Africa was our first trip with Goway, and we went to a few countries in the southern part, and then off to the South Pacific with Goway. So that was a personalized guide and driver kind of thing, and our first time into that part of the world.
So again, when you said you went to the South Pacific, was that the Papua New Guinea trip, or?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, okay. So again, I guess that's my my curiosity question, and I'm with you in spirit in regards to looking at these type of countries again. The sort of last frontiers or the less traveled areas. So I love the fact that that's what you looked at. But I also noticed in your past travels you mentioned Bolivia as well, which within the world of Latin America, which is my area of expertise, that would be one of the last frontiers within Latin America. So I'm inspired to hear that that's what you're looking at. So what took you to Papua New Guinea over doing, I guess, one of the more predictable destinations for particularly a first-time traveler to the South Pacific? Why did you choose Papua New Guinea over Australia or New Zealand?
Well, we didn't. We chose Papua New Guinea as a part of our South Pacific trip. We also included Australia.
Oh, you did?
We did 2 weeks Australia, 2 weeks Papua New Guinea, 2 weeks Vanuatu, and about 10 days in Fiji. So it became a part of our South Pacific trip.
Oh, I see. Sorry, I misunderstood. Okay, well that makes a bit more sense again because it's such a long way to go. You might as well knock as much off as you can in a short 100%. Period of time.
That's right on.
But my comment still stands. I believe that even adding Papua New Guinea is something that most people would not do. So for those who may not know where it is, I'll throw up a map as I'm saying this. Papua New Guinea, as I mentioned in the intro as well, is the second largest island and sits above the largest island or continent, or one of the largest continents, Australia. The landmass is split into two. One half, the eastern part is, as we're discussing today, Papua New Guinea, and the western part belongs to the country of Indonesia. So what attracted you to Papua New Guinea? Now, you mentioned, John, that it was the old school National Geographic, which I remember growing up too. If you look at National Geographic, the iconic site was a tribesperson from Papua New Guinea always seemed to be that thing. So was it solely that childhood memory, or was it some more modern exploration or research that wanted you to, or that led you there?
Yeah, I would say probably a bit of both. Certainly, when you plan a trip of that nature, you have to think about more than just what you used to read, but also what's the latest in terms of safety and security. Right. And so with Goway, we worked actually almost 2 years before we finalized the plan. A couple things happened. I believe one of the tour operators that Goway was using went out of business, which affects the plan, of course.
Yes, of course.
We also we had some tribal conflict in one of the areas that we were supposed to go to in our earlier plans, and we spoke to your Goway representative, but perhaps eliminating that area in our travel. So then we fine-tuned it, and then, as maybe not know, but we also did ask through Goway if we have a foundation in our local community for early literacy, and we often, when we travel, we try and provide some funding or some support to local schools or educational groups that we come across. And we did ask the local, through Goway again, the local operator in Papua New Guinea, to give us some ideas where we could support that. And that became a big feature in our trip to Papua New Guinea.
Okay, excellent. And we'll expand on that in a minute. So was the choice of Papua New Guinea in its infrastructure, maybe lack thereof, that you would obviously see probably in Australia and elsewhere? Is that something that I don't want to say the word concern you, because obviously it doesn't, because you did travel there, but a lot of people won't be looking for the Roughty Toughty, as I term it. Is that something that you like to seek, the Roughty Toughty side of travel?
Somewhat. I think that what counterbalances that is that we look for guide and driver, so that we're traveling very personably, and we have that contact with someone who's with us all the time, and that allows us to not be maybe as fearful of going to more remote places.
Okay. Now that's a key aspect to what Goway does, be it somewhere like Papua New Guinea, Bolivia, Italy, Sydney, is that we highly suggest the personal, private guided touring for the reasons that Peggy just mentioned, or that's one of. There is that security aspect, particularly if you're in areas that may not be so heavily touristed, which is a good thing. But also, and I guess you two can speak to this as well, is you have that true flexibility of being able to do what you want to do when you want to do it, based on your guides and your conversation and personal interests. Sure. The tour can be designed that way, or it can turn that way when you're in country. And I've had this experience where we're speaking to a guide and a topic comes up and he's able to take us to something that reflects the topic we just discussed. Would you agree that that's also one of the good aspects of that type of traveling, regardless of country?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I think that we get a very close, a much closer connection to the people and the culture, because we're talking with someone who actually lives there and he's with us. And once you break down some of those barriers around just relationship, then you get into good, solid conversations. You talk about the politics, you talk about what's really happening there. And we come away, I think, with a really sound sense of today's world for these people or that country.
He's a really tough warrior during war raiding. Mm-hmm. So Yokoi tribe did very well, and they win the best territory of mass of land, hunting, fishing, sago farming areas. Yokoi tribe did it in Karawari, and they have occupied full Karawari by Yokoi tribe. They beat the other tribes by war raid, and they're the cannibals. They kill the victims, they brought them back, and they take the trophies, the skull, and then they steam cook, skulls kept in the spirit houses, paint, and then the body is cut among themselves, and then they cook and they eat.
I'd agree 100%. We had, I was traveling through Eastern Europe just as the Ukraine war broke out. We were in Romania, and our guide was discussing with us what it was like from their side of the world, in that, they, at that time, it wasn't encroaching, but the different views and outlooks and opinions and stuff was very, very enlightening, which you would probably not get in, group environments necessarily. So I can well imagine the in-depth knowledge you two gained through the private guide and or driver would have been definitely well worth it.
Yeah.
From a logistical point of view, now I actually didn't research this because I wanted to, have this a fresh answer to my question is, how do you get there? Did you do it before Australia, or did you get to Papua New Guinea from Australia, or can you tell us how you got there?
Yeah, so it's our first trip was in Australia. So we flew from Vancouver to Australia, and then did the east coast of Australia, and then from there you can easily get to Papua New Guinea. So Brisbane is probably a central focus point for flights to Port Moresby. You can also fly out of Port Douglas, but we were in Brisbane.
Okay.
I can't. I said Port Douglas. I meant Cairns.
I was going to ask. And I was going to mention. Yeah, you could probably get out of or Cairns as well.
Yeah,
if you want to do it. But you guys flew out of Brisbane as well. So some of the practical matters, which people I'm sure will be very interested in, as I am. Did you need any specific shots to visit Papua New Guinea? Is it a malaria area? Is it a yellow fever area?
Yep. You have your malaria tablets. You take them before you enter the country and keep taking them for a little bit after. We also have, because we've already traveled, some of the things we already had, yellow fever. We did take the shot for Japanese encephalitis simply because mosquitoes, they hang out there. And on top of that, I highly recommend people take along with them an antibiotic for diarrhea.
Okay.
You can take your Twin Rex or whatever for that, but that's just a baseline. The water is not good in Papua New Guinea, and you have to be quite cautious.
Okay. Now, just from a legal point of view here, I just need to state this, that my opinion and Peggy's advice there is her personal advice. We are not doctors, etc. So personal. Please, personal.
From experience, personal.
No, I hear you 100%. But just talking from Goway's point of view, when it comes to any type of shot, please speak to your doctor or travel clinic about the destination you're traveling to. But again, what your doctor will probably tell you is what Peggy and John's doctor told them. So the information will probably not be different. But again, please speak to your doctor in that instance. So you mentioned the water is not great to drink, potable water. From a food point of view, what's that like? Is it local cuisine? Is it, again, and I've never been to Papua New Guinea. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. I actually lived in Papua New Guinea for about a year, but I was, I think, 1 or 2 years old. So I can say it, but I have no memories whatsoever of it.
Yeah.
So my knowledge is nil. So from a food point of view, what's it like eating down there? Is it, again, local, Western, etc.?
Yeah. So they try very hard from their perspective of what a tourist is. They try to have foods that the North American, European, Australian tourist is going to like. So they're not, unless you're going into the village, and even when you do that, you have to carry your own food. So they're trying to cater to you as much as possible. They have purified water, but you have to be careful because some of that infrastructure isn't always working.
Right.
Correctly. Because
sorry, go on.
The country's poor. They're trying to put together a tourist industry. They don't have a lot of money, and some things fall apart. In my case, it was the purification system in the one lodge was not, I think, working.
Right. So, is there a marked difference from when you land in Port Moresby? Do you feel like you're landing in a developed city, like an equivalent of, again, not as big as Sydney, of course, or Brisbane, but or even Vancouver? Does it feel like a modern city, or do you feel from the moment you land in their capital city that you've already taken that step back? I don't mean back in a negative way. I mean backwards in time to a degree.
Well, as soon as you land, time becomes its own slow pace. Okay. So that happens the moment you land. You'll notice that right away. But the airport is very professional, and Goway set us up with a very modern and probably the best hotel in Port Moresby, which doesn't take you into the city itself very far. You're quite close to the airport. In fact, it's called the Airway, so you're quite close to the airport. But in tours, you go into the city. Once you start going into the city, you realize that they don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the services. You'll notice that right away.
Okay, then. And then when you headed off to visit the villages, which we'll get into again in more detail in a minute, I guess there's yet another marked difference in infrastructure, as in probably lack thereof.
Not even electricity.
Oh, really? So it is that sort of
no electricity.
Old school. Okay.
Old
yes.
Old school. Yeah.
No. Even from the point of flying out. You mentioned at your intro, I should back up. You mentioned in your intro a lot about the marine culture, the scuba diving, the snorkeling, that thing. But we were inland. Yes. So once we left Port Moresby, which does not have any roads as the capital city to connect it to any other place within its own country, you have to fly to get anywhere else within the country. So we flew from there to Goroka. And Goroka starts to get you into the highlands in the center of the country. So when you even start that flight, you know that things are less predictable, less reliable. And you have to be, here's the number one word, you just have to be patient.
Patient and flexible.
You just have to work with and take a deep breath and keep going. And because you know that it's going to be worth it in the end, you just relax. What happens is
go with the flow. Fair enough.
You have to go with
the flow. So the aircraft that get you around internally, they would be sort of smaller, light aircraft, correct?
Well, we're waiting in the terminal in Mount Hagen for a private airplane flight to Kauai. And this is the terminal surroundings that we are in. Wouldn't say it's exactly the most comfortable situation. These are the supplies that are being stored here for other, I think, companies to fly out to the hinterlands of Papua New Guinea.
Yeah, they were Fokker 100s and so they have a national airline, Air Niugini. It is, and I will say, I don't know how to be polite about this, but it is disorganized, and we really needed local tour operators to assist us to make the flights, and I'm no understating of that. And then, so they get you into the uplands with their traditional twin-engine jets. Once you get on the aircraft, it's fine. But going to the villages on the sea peak, well, then we needed to take a small private airplane, single engine, and land on a little teeny weeny grass runway in the jungle.
Wow. To me, this sounds absolutely amazing. From a language point of view, I would assume that English is widely spoken or spoken enough for a traveler to get around and communicate, excluding maybe the tribes themselves.
No, not really.
No. Really?
Because there are so many tribes, and it's quite fascinating to consider that those villages that might be 7 to 10 kilometers apart, they each developed language independently. So within the island, there are 180 some dialects, and what they share is Pidgin English. So when the Europeans arrived, then they adjusted, or they converted the languages to have this Pidgin English. That's what their go-to in talking to people is, which I did not understand. It's a mixture of French and German and English and the local dialects too, and so it's quite complicated. So you rely on the guides to have a better knowledge of English, and we were very fortunate that the TNT group that we worked with, that's one of the things that they looked for in their guides was a standard of English, so that they could communicate with the tourist.
Yeah, so just to add to Peggy's point as well, you can find tribes only 8 kilometers apart who speak different languages. So they cannot speak their own tribal language, and you'll find that the Pidgin English is their go-to, I guess, common language that how they communicate. But we needed, obviously, the English trained guides to be able to interpret.
Okay. Do you know where the root of their language is from? Is it Indonesian? Is it?
No, I don't know the root. Only that each one of the tribes, and they are isolated. Truly, they lived an isolated, very small scale existence, and did not have communication. They did not have a trade system. The river, to me, it's a great highway, but the river did not connect these tribes. So, or did not act as a connection until we get into the European coming on board and moving throughout the country, that you see these kinds of contexts that brought about more trade between them. Wow. They still continue to live a subsistence existence. Everyone has a garden in the interior. They can live without money, except for one, education. The country does not pay for public education, so they need money to pay for their children to go to school. The second thing they need money for is a cell phone, because the cell phone is ubiquitous. It is everywhere. They buy minutes. They buy it by the minutes, what they want, and you will see the cell phone even within the most remote areas.
Wow, amazing. So, okay, which I'm going to jump around a bit here in my thought process. You mentioned the cell phone. So, for a traveler, is there a cell connection, particularly up in the highlands?
Well, that's not good.
No, not good. Okay, it's there, but not to be relied upon. Okay, so I'm absolutely fascinated by this, but let me just get back to a core question for you. Yeah. So, was the attraction for Papua New Guinea this experience to meet the tribes, or was it? I know you didn't go coastal. Was it to see Port Moresby, or was your driving desire was to interact with the tribes of Papua New Guinea?
It's cultural.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In cultural and landscape, I have a degree in geography, and I love geography. I love the fact that you can see so many different landscapes, environments, and how people adapt to each of those different places. But culturally would be the number one attraction, I think.
Now we go. Okay.
Yeah, and I think interactions with the locals. You don't have to be. We don't have to go to all the big national museums and things of that sort to do typical tourist things. But tell me more about how it is to live here. Tell me more about your political landscape, and that. And if we can get that kind of contact, then we have had a successful trip.
Oh, excellent. So we do have a lot of people, particularly from the US, who will travel to the South Pacific to explore some of the World War II history.
Yes.
Now, I know Canada and the US were down there, but it's really, Papua New Guinea is quite famous in the Australian collective memory.
It is.
For things like the Kokoda Trail.
It is.
And there was a lot of pretty heavy, nasty warfare between the Japanese and the Allies, and primarily spearheaded by the Australians down there. And just a little segue here, the Papua New Guinean people, for the most part, fought on the Allies side, and the Australian soldiers, well, the Papua New Guineans helped with evacuating the wounded and whatnot, and the Australians had a very cute term for it. It's probably not politically correct these days, but at the time it's called the fuzzy wuzzies, because the Papua New Guineans had like big afro hairstyles. I'll throw up an image to show you there. So if someone is interested in World War II history, and I heard John, you sort of nodding in agreement there already, this would be a good destination for them if that is their interest.
Well, they have obviously the big Boma site in Port Moresby, which is cemetery, which I think there's 3,400 Australians been buried there. And the Kokoda Trail, you know, when we flew from Brisbane to Port Moresby, half that plane was doing the Kokoda Trail.
Oh, they were.
It is a big destination for Australians.
It is.
Phenomenal.
And it's actually, and it's, for those who may be interested, Goway can assist with the Kokoda Trail. It is a very tough trail. It's,
we already met people who were helicoptered out when we were in Moresby.
Really?
Their potassium levels went down to a point of being a problem. The other one we did specifically ask when we were in Wewak to visit the final surrender site for the Japanese, and that was sometime after the signing of the in Japan. So the Australians, and there is a site there that explains how the final battle between the Australians and the Japanese went. And your guide theoretically knows something about it. But there's also a really good site in Wewak.
Yeah. So again, for those who are interested in World War II, it is quite heavily Australia focused, but and as you would have seen on the map I put up earlier, it was literally on our doorstep, so it was vital to the Australians and in turn the Allies. And again, the Kokoda Trail is an option for anyone listening that may like to do it, but as John's already mentioned, it's tough and people don't make it and either have to get flown out halfway through. And we can imagine that people were fighting a war over that mountain pass and that mountain range. It's impressive, and lest we forget for all of our veterans. So you mentioned earlier, John and Peggy, that you're part of a group within your hometown foundation. Can you explain what that foundation is, and then how that translated as to part of your trip, or a core part of your trip when you went to Papua New Guinea?
Well, we have, like in many communities in Canada, a community foundation. So you give money to the foundation, and each year that foundation will allocate that money to local programs and services, but only based on the interest spent on the principal. So it acts in perpetuity. Within the foundation in our community, we've established an early literacy foundation so that we give our money to the foundation, they manage it, and we in turn recommend to where the interest payments for that year go to the programs. So we've taken early literacy as well to our travels. We, like I said, when we go to, I don't know what kind of travelers we are, but if we find that we can help fund a library and a school, we will when we're on a trip. And it's not, it's just something that we do. But on this trip here in Papua New Guinea, we specifically asked, we would, how can we bring some educational supplies versus cash to local villages? And we asked the local tour operator to recommend to us what villages. And from that, a part of our Papua New Guinea experience was built upon.
Okay. So when within your foundation back home, like I'm sure it's not just you two, it's a group of people, as you mentioned, do you sort of request or bid upon where the funds go? So I guess what I'm asking is, why did the foundation allow this contribution to your particular travels? I know it wasn't to your travels, but to the end goal of you donating to a tribe within Papua New Guinea.
Yeah.
The foundation is actually separate from it's. I think it's based upon an interest. I was a teacher, an interest that we have in sharing what we have accumulated over time is in early literacy. It is a passion for us. So separately, we have a foundation in our hometown, and that's its focus. Second, and separate from that, when we travel, we have found that we have found that when we go to some of countries where, as you said, it's a little rougher to travel to, there's a level of corruption in various levels of the politics, even in the education system. Ecuador, Bolivia, South Africa, they all had examples of this. So what we've discovered is if we can take not the cash, but if we can take the things that they need in some regard, then we do that. And so in Bolivia, we did the same. We buy the supplies in the country and take them to a remote area that we're traveling to. And we did that here in Papua New Guinea. We bought supplies in Mount Hagen, and with the cooperation of the tour company, because that we had to fly. So with their cooperation, we were able to take these supplies to a more remote area. We're fronting the cost to get supplies into a remote area. And those are supplies that they themselves have said, well, these are the things we need. And so then we took them to these, on a dugout canoe for 3 days. We took them to these remote villages. In one case, the school was actually closed. There had been a flood. The people in the village still had to rebuild 30 homes. And there is no government support for that. So they were rebuilding their homes first, of course. And then they would rebuild the part of the school that was damaged. Certainly things were damaged, and they will hold on to those supplies. And no, you also need to take something for a little more fun, like a rugby ball or soccer ball or something like that, along with it. That's an essential school supply as well. The second village that we went to, their school was in operation, and the kids came out to meet us. They stayed after school, and it was about an hour after school that they stayed, the teachers and the kids, to meet us. Because although we were there, it was island time, so things moved slowly. And even when we took the supplies there, they had an issue between the tribes that were coming to this local area to go to school. One tribe owned the rugby field, and one tribe sat where the school was. So they were having a discussion right now, and they couldn't use the rugby balls because they couldn't use the rugby field just yet. So, it is just a very interesting place, of course, to visit.
It sounds it. So I think one key thing here I'd like to bring up is that if any of our clients out there, our travel partners, are suggesting this to their clients about donating to a community anywhere in the world, please check first just showing up with stuff, because as Peggy's alluded to there, it could cause internal conflict. It might be the wrong stuff that's not needed. It's always best to ask and check first. It could be culturally insensitive to give things. People might not take it the way it was intended as well. So please do, as John and Peggy and their foundation have done, just speak to your Goway representative, who will in turn speak to our ground operators to make sure that what you bring is appropriate, accepted, etc., like that. But please do, if this is what drives you, and I hope it does a lot of people out there, it's a fantastic thing to do, and I've done it in the past with groups prior to my time at Goway as well. And even so, like, I was in the highlands of Peru when I did it, but Papua New Guinea sounds like it's even more needed. So on that point, you mentioned that the tribes are sort of close together distance-wise, but still very, very isolated, different languages, and they may not interact with each other a lot, if at all. So from an education point of view and your philanthropy work of taking supplies in, questions for you. Who are the teachers in these schools? Are they locals? Are they foreigners coming in? And as an extension to that, because the languages are so endemic to each tribe, is it being taught in English? Like, can you explain how that works?
They're usually a local person that comes in, reasonably local, because as you said, the dialect makes a difference. They teach in Pidgin English. It's not a purist English. Our guide that took us along the CPIC, he was self-trained. He had worked his way through up the channels in the industry because he was a very good listener, and he kept trying to make himself better. And that seems to be part of what they will try to do. Those who want to succeed are trying to do it because they have that inner desire to do better at what they're doing. And so his English was actually very good, although heavily accented, and you have to have you have to be a good listener yourself to work your way through the accent.
Right.
Yeah, but I would say they're typically local, and we our guide's son was going to school to be a teacher, and he was coming back to his local area, his local tribe. Elementary schools will draw the children in from a wide area. High schools are much less frequent, and they are in larger centers. And so the children have to be set up in residences to go to high school and to go to college. They have to be in a residence away from their families.
Right. So that's my next question. So you've obviously mentioned they have elementary school. There is a high school option. Now, if someone wants to go to higher education, university, college, is that in the village or nearby, or do they have to go into somewhere like Port Moresby to go to university, or even into Australia or somewhere nearby?
A larger center. It will not happen in the village.
No.
Okay.
And their parents have to pay. Those children can't make much money at all, so the parents are trying to raise the funds in whatever way they can. And
so how would they, sorry to interrupt, how would they raise funds if they're in the hills, the highlands of Papua New Guinea? Because it sounds, again, very tribal, very in its way. So how does a tribal family make money? And you did mention before, they don't really use money. So on the flip side, how do they raise funds for things that are expected to be paid for, university or healthcare for that matter, if that comes into play?
I think it's extremely challenging, but every village you visit, the women will set out a blanket and they will show their craft, the things that they make. So they make such a little amount of money from those kinds of crafts, but that is a way for them to earn money. Secondly, we as a tourist are a source for them. So I found them to be very generous with, when you're in a village, they will change their attire to show you that, yes, we can dress this way. We don't necessarily dress like this all the time. We were in some villages that do still dress in the grass, etc. We can show you our traditional dress. We can show you how we typically still make our meals. We can show you how we do our crafting, how we weave our baskets, because all men and women do carry a crossover bag, which is typical of this culture and carries all those necessary things in it. That's something they make all the time, something that they will sell. So we, as the tourist, need to consider that we're a primary source for them. And I don't think that they make it an overtly, what would you say, fake kind of tourist presentation to you. They are living a history. For us, we would call it history. Yeah. When you go into the museum at Port Moresby, the things you see in the museum are the things that they are using day to day.
Wow.
So they are living their history, and just maybe some of the clothes and things they will change back to show you the more typical, or they will take from the men's lodge. They will actually wear the body mask, the head masks, the things. They will take them, put them on, and perform a ceremony for you. And then they go and they hang it back up inside the men's lodge, because it's a living part of their history.
So, Don, back to your question, how do they make money? I honestly can't tell you that I saw a lot of production of anything. And
okay,
so
that's my next question about farming. No farming, right?
No, so I honestly can't say that I know myself how they make money. There is a few nickel and dimes. Some tourists come in and drop a few cents, in my view, but there is no industry structure to make money so kids can go to school.
Wow, yeah, that's. I guess it's fascinating because, to quote Peggy, it's basically a living history. They're not seeing a need for money because they're just living day to day. But again, it's creeping in that, and it's a good thing. The first thing that's creeping in is education. That to get educated, hopefully they're going to have a desire to want to do something. Not that there's anything wrong with what they're doing, but I don't want to say bigger and better, but move beyond their village and maybe work in Port Moresby or become a tour guide or something like
well,
that.
There's interesting you raised that. There is a bit of a conflict. There are some of the young people who want to move away, and some of the older folk want them to, and if they move away, to come back. And so there's a bit of we ran into some 20-year-old types that were visiting, but they prefer to be a tradesman in a larger center that takes 2 days to get to. But they talk to their moms and dads and their uncles. Well, they're concerned about the younger kids moving out.
Right. Yeah. Look, this is fascinating because, again, I want to pick up on the term Peggy used, like a living history. I think you were lucky enough, fortunate enough to be, or they're seeing that changing world for them, that, the old ways are still being clung on to, but like all younger generations, they want something new and different. But it's, beyond, hey, I want they do want cell phones, but, I want this from a materialistic point of view too. They want a completely different lifestyle. So that had to be fascinating, seeing that happening, albeit in a very short period of time, happening in front of you.
It's very confusing, not just fascinating, because I find that they're living a subsistence level, which we as North Americans call poverty. Yeah. But the poverty, that's a judgment call. And I'm not judging them for and saying that they're in poverty. Their existence is such, and they manage quite well, but the passion we have in education, it's confusing because education makes you want more. And where does that take you? Yeah. And that takes them away from their history and their backgrounds. And I think that's the challenge, is that it is going to move them away from an existence. It's going to create that chasm between the people that are still living the village life and still subsistence and managing quite well and not seeing the need for those other influences. And yet they have a modern world. Like Port Moresby is a modern city with thousands of people squatting on the outskirts of that city without any kind of services, because they are looking for a more modern existence.
Right.
But the challenge is that the government is broke. It doesn't have any money.
So I should say, to Don, that there is a big difference between the village life on the river and the cities that are in the uplands. So the cities in the uplands, you have access to Canadian mine operations west of where we are. So there's cash generated by that. They also have their own local economy things. Some of it built around beetle nuts, of all things. If you can get beetle nut up there, everybody's got to have a beetle nut. That's just, there are local economies, and so they do their own thing.
So is the country sitting on top of mineral deposits or anything like that, or is it? It is? Okay, so there is foreign investment. You did mention Canadian mining companies there.
Yeah.
China's there in a big way.
China's there as well. Okay.
China's doing a lot of road work for the government.
Yeah, building bridges.
Yeah.
Okay, so there is some foreign investment and some development happening. I guess that's positive without getting into any sort of ulterior motives by the mining companies and governments. We won't do that.
Well, you're on an interesting topic.
Yeah. We won't be political. Yeah. We'll avoid the politics in this little podcast. Just a couple of questions that came off that conversation there. We mentioned making money. What is the currency in Papua New Guinea?
Kina.
So it's a local currency.
It's based on a shell, and I think this very super large shell, which they did trade for, and that's the basis of their money. And you can see that. You can see that in all the craft places.
But if you're looking to buy food or souvenirs, etc., you would use a local currency. Can you use Australian dollars? Can you use credit cards and debit cards in the city?
In the city use debit and credit cards, but you need Kina as well when you're in the rural area because there are no systems in place. Yeah. So if you're want to tip a guide, then you need local currency.
Yeah.
Oh, really? So they take local currency over Australian dollars or US dollars?
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay. You're not finding US Australian dollars, at least in the populations that we ran into.
Okay. Interesting.
You need to have local Kina. So you have to go to, when you first get into the cities, you need to get to an ATM machine and get your cash.
Get your cash. On that note of cash, what's the cost of living for a tourist? Like, is it an expensive destination to visit when you're on the ground?
You want me to tackle that one?
Yeah, you can.
It is one of the Papua New Guinea we found as one of the most expensive travel destinations that we could have. I don't know if it's because of the type of travel we organized, but you'd be in the 2,000 plus day Canadian for sure.
Seriously. Well, again, I think.
But he's averaging in a small plane flight, cargo flight.
Okay. So
you've got to average that. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. And I was about to clarify John's statement there of the amount because of the type of travel you did, and it sounds like the type of the country Papua New Guinea is. But before I jump back into that, from buying a meal or something like that, buying a souvenir, is that on par, affordable, cheap?
Well, for one, when we travel like that, we don't buy too many souvenirs.
Okay.
Your luggage is limited, and so when you're flying small, it keeps that cost down because you don't have any room to carry that.
Fair enough.
And usually, the only place that we're not the kind of couple that goes out at night. That keeps us safe too. We're not out for supper. We're not traveling around at night in the bigger centers. And one night, I think we went the mosquito. Only one night did the mosquitoes in the entire trip send us to bed at 7:30. But
Sorry, go on. So from a social point of view, now again, going to the highlands, of course, I know this wouldn't be applicable, but if you're in Port Moresby, you're doing the coastal and you're into diving and you're doing that type of thing, from the time you're in the cities, what was the mix, I guess, for want of a better term, of foreigners into Papua New Guinea, like tourists, other tourists from the States, Australia, New Zealand, around. So I guess if you are into a nightlife, is there a nightlife to be had in the cities?
Port Moresby, yes.
Well, to be honest with you, I didn't see many tourists.
You didn't? Okay.
No. So we can say in Port Moresby, well, we met two Americans.
Americans, Australians, for sure.
Well, yeah, well, they were doing the Kokoda Trail. But it's not, what we picked up was that after COVID, they are still recovering from COVID and the decline of the industry. And it has not, it has not come back. So we were in some big lodge resort types. In what's it called? Well, Kawari was just the two of us, and in Mount Hagen, Rondon Lodge, there's us two and maybe another 3-4.
Yeah, over.
And that was it. The tourism industry is still recovering from COVID.
Wow. Okay. So everyone out there, book people to Papua New Guinea, help them out. I'm going to jump back to the village visit for a minute. When you visited the villages, did you stay with the tribes overnight, or was it like in a day visit?
No, we stayed overnight. We were in. They're trying to set up a lodge. A guest house. So there's a couple. The entrepreneurial spirit is quite well and alive. So we had a couple individuals in each village, and they had they had built a part of their lodge, had been set up so that they could have separate rooms, and that could be a guest room. What they provide you with is a 2-inch foamy and a mosquito net. And that's what you get.
And so it's very basic. Yeah. Okay.
And the bathroom, the outhouse, would be about 50 meters away where the crocodiles live. So,
oh, lovely.
and you have a pail and a scoop for a shower.
Right. Okay. Sorry to interrupt. Okay. So just wrapping up here. It doesn't sound like it is a very rustic type of destination. It is very old school. That's my term. So, back in the day, costs are up there because of the type of travel, at least in your case that you did, with the small planes getting to the villages, private jets at times. So that's understandable from a cost point of view when you factor in how you're getting around.
It is.
But that's also almost necessitated if you want to get into the highlands of Papua New Guinea, because as you mentioned earlier on, there are no roads out there. The tribes are very basic, as we discussed, very geographically somewhat close, but isolated in their cultural aspect, languages, etc. It's absolutely, to me, fascinating. And I kudos to you for taking it on. Because it's roughy toughy travel without a doubt. Even as you mentioned, Port Moresby is their big city, but it's not what people may expect.
We had a guide when we were traveling on the river who said to us when he first saw us, he thought, "Oh, this is not going to work because you can't. We're not particularly young." And he looked at us and he says, "This isn't going to work," but he didn't say anything. But I'm quoting him because at the end of the time with us, he did say to us, "You've been our best clients for me so far." And I think part of that is because we didn't complain. We go with what's there and make the best of where we are. And it's just being open-minded and learning what you can. And they always provided us with experiences that were astonishing. The cultural experiences that we had, just the two of us standing side by side with the Mudmen or the Wigmen, or having a discussion about cannibalism, or, having our guide talk to us about being part of the Malpa tribe. I mean, all of those were so personable because we're side by side.
Yeah. And I think, I'm going to speak personally here, but I think I can say on behalf of Goway, you two encapsulate what a real traveler should be. I don't mean a tourist, I mean a traveler. People who are willing to truly push themselves from comfort levels, open their minds to different cultures at its base level, I mean that in a positive way.
Yeah.
Obviously, these tribes as, basically subsistent living at this stage. And again, to quote Peggy again, the living history is a thing that attracts you. I know most people want to get some of that, but I think that's the operative word. Often they'll travel and get a little taste of it. You guys have totally immersed yourself in what is, to me, an absolutely fascinating cultural experience, an absolutely fascinating destination. And please, anyone out there listening, I highly recommend, and I've been there technically, but for all intents and purposes, I haven't, but I'm completely inspired by John and Peggy's story today it wasn't on my list of things to do. I think I have to add it there now.
Yes, please do.
It's amazing. So on that note, before we say goodbye, is there anything else, John or Peggy, you'd like to say or pass on to myself or to our listening audience about your experience in Papua New Guinea?
Well, I think you have an excellent tour operator in Papua New Guinea. I'm going to put a plug in here for TNT Tours.
Please do.
Goway worked with them very well to achieve our objectives, and we totally appreciate the planning that went into it.
Well, we're glad we could help. Peggy, anything you'd like to leave us with before we say goodbye?
No, I think that, no, I said that when you have to be open-minded, you have to be patient, and things will go wrong, especially when you go into the backwoods of any country. Things will go wrong, and just be prepared for that, and then, work it out, because it will.
When things go wrong, and at the end of the day, everyone comes out happy, safe and sound, they are the best stories that you will pass, that you'll pass on to your friends over the dinner table or at the pub. So on that note, I really like to thank John and Peggy for their time today. I really appreciate you passing on your experiences in Papua New Guinea. I also appreciate the sights and sounds that we put up over our visual podcast today. Anyone out there has any questions about Papua New Guinea, please reach out to your destination specialist in the South Pacific Department here at Goway. As John has said outright, our ground operators in Papua New Guinea are second to none. They will look after you. And as you've heard from John and Peggy's stories today and experiences today, and this is what Goway does and goes probably does the best in North America. We will customize the trip to what suits you. And as you've heard here, I think there's probably no better example of a customized trip than the trip that John and Peggy have taken into Papua New Guinea, with all the little different logistics involved, getting them from Port Moresby up to the highlands of Papua New Guinea to experience the local tribes there. So everyone, thank you very much for your time today. And again, once again, John and Peggy, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.